Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So, we won't have a live session today. Instead, I am going to post a very, I hope it will be a small video, I don't know, looking at scenes 3, 4, and 5. So, if you have read the scenes, you can directly go ahead and watch this video. Otherwise, it might be a good idea to go read the scenes first and then watch this, because I won't be going into a lot of details about what is going on in these scenes, because they are small scenes, and once you read them, you'll be able to connect most of the ideas that I'm going to tell you in this video. So let us look at the first scene. The title of the first scene is, scene 3, which we are going to discuss first here, is The Fool is the Queen. So this is an interesting title because it is almost like, a metaphor, right? The fool is the queen. The reason for this title is because in this scene, it is the fool who plays out the character of the queen. Okay, this is a scene in which at the beginning you see the nurse talking to the fool, but in fact she is not the fool, she is the queen. So it is almost a kind of a dual role, a double role, in which the fool is acting as both the fool and the queen. The title is also interesting because you have a very strange combination. Normally, the queen is one of the highest, citizens, or the most powerful citizens in a country, and the fool is the least powerful. So you have a situation in which the least powerful person is playing the part of the most powerful person. So it is in a very in a situation of class inversion. Somebody from the working class is playing an aristocratic role. So that is something interesting about this scene. But more than that, the scene tells us about the the difference between the fool and the queen. Normally, we would consider a queen to be wise, somebody who is powerful, somebody who is in control of her own life. But the queen that we see in this scene is none of that. She is first of all, she is physically very ill. She is sick. Secondly, she has no control over her own life. She has no attachment towards her children. She has no attachment towards her husband. In fact, she is almost like a fool, right? She is a person who is who is entrusted with certain duties which she has no she doesn't have any freedom to abandon those duties. And what are these duties? The queen is in charge of every aspect of running the country. King Lear is too busy with enjoying life. He is a sports person. He goes out hunting and drinking and having affairs with other women, and he leaves all the mundane affairs of the government to the queen. So the queen has become almost like a servant who must do what normally would be the duty of the king. So if you look at this picture, this is a painting called The Wise Fool. You see a courtroom. You see in the background a party going on with people dancing, and at the same time the country is being attacked by enemy troops, and the only one who shows any kind of worry about the attack of the country is the fool. Okay, so you have this is also an inversion. You have the fool who is depicted as being extremely worried, and the lords and the ladies, the noblemen, who have no care at all. So that is the same, or that is a similar idea that we get from reading the beginning of the scene. The second important aspect of the scene is about the physical, unwellness of the queen. So normally we would consider, a queen to have access to the best, medical care, or she would have access to the best things which can be supplied to, to make her fit. But here we see the queen undergoing all kind of, quack treatments. A quack is a fake doctor. So we have people who are trying and giving her all kinds of medications just so that she can conceive again. So the reason for the queen's illness is, not because she's doing some kind of, extreme physical labor, but it is because of Lear's desire to have a male child. Lear is constantly, putting her under this pressure to conceive again and to have a male heir to the kingdom. So we see the nurse trying to comfort the queen in various ways. We see her suggesting that perhaps the queen ought to go to the countryside, have a vacation, enjoy some time off, spend some time with your children. But the queen does not have that freedom. She says that this is not an idea which will be received well by the king. So she says, she must continue in her duties, otherwise the kingdom, will not be, stable. So she must stay here, and she must balance all the account books of the country, balance the taxes, the income, the expenditure. All these things must be done. So altogether, life for the queen is a very weary affair, just like it was a weary affair for another Shakespearean character, the character of Mariana from Measure for Measure. So Mariana is also a character who suffers a lot of injustice, and she falls in love with a person, but after her dowry was lost in a shipwreck, after her father lost all his money, she was rejected by her fiancé. Just like Cordelia's dowry is lost in King Lear's play, Mariana's dowry is lost because of a shipwreck. And what is interesting about Mariana is that she is a person who signifies burden, the burdens that life has placed on her. And her famous quote from the play is, "My life is dreary, he cometh not. I am aweary, I would that I were dead." So she is almost, in a kind of a suicidal, mentality, and we find the same sort of a, approach to life from Queen in this play. King Lear, on the other hand, could not be bothered with anything. Right? He spends his time mostly away from his wife and daughters. He's supposed to be an extremely agile person, a very sportsman-like figure, and later on we'll come to know about some of his exploits. But anyway, as this picture suggests, King Lear is a figure who is removed from all kinds of associations. We don't find him anywhere near his wife or his children having anything like a family, a life, but he is a monolithic, solitary, unapproachable, and somehow imposing figure. and we will meet more of these aspects of his character in the next scene. Okay, so one of the suggestions that the nurse puts before the queen is that she should spend more time with her children. But we understand from the queen's words that it is her children that weary her most. So again, this is something which is in contradiction to what we have come to expect from maternal relationships. That is the relationship between a mother and her children. So normally the dominant narrative is that of unconditional love, that a mother will always be present for her children no matter what. But here in the queen, we have a mother who openly declares that she does not have that kind of an attachment towards her children. And right from the beginning, we find that the children too are more attached to their nurse than to their mother. So that is also another aspect of the story that is very clear in this scene. And we come to the second part of the scene. The second part is actually an introduction to the relationship that each of the daughters have with their father. So in the first part we saw the mother, and the second part we are looking at the daughters in relation to their father. So we should remember that these three daughters, they are royal princesses, but again the idea of wealth and power is not completely, it is not a rosy picture. It is not always optimistic. Just because one is a princess doesn't mean that she gets all the best things in life. So in the second part of the scene, we find encounters between the daughters and their father. So each daughter, Cordelia, Regan and Gondrel, in that order, the play gives us instances of these three daughters interacting or trying to interact with their father, and all of this is placed in the same frame. That is, the daughter would come down the stairs, she would enter a room where there is the presence of the father, and then there is some sort of an interaction between the daughter and the father. So this framework, coming down the stairs, entering a room, interacting with the father, that framework is repeated for each of the three daughters. The first interaction is between Cordelia and her father. She is very eager to come down the stairs and go into the room where her father is. So she runs down the stairs. She is very eager that she doesn't want to run because she doesn't want to fall down, but at the same time she wants to reach her father as quickly as possible. So she comes down the stairs, she opens the door, and she is extremely warmly received by her father. Her father picks her up, kisses her on the cheek, cuddles her, and then sets her down on the table. And then what does she do? She dances for her father. So this is an extremely positive interaction, a very warm and loving interaction that we see between Cordelia and her father. But this is narrated by Cordelia. We don't know what actually happened, but this is Cordelia's impression of that interaction. Now, when it comes to Regan, this picture is completely reversed. So in Regan's case, the time is after midnight. It is in the middle of the night. Cordelia and Goneril are asleep, and Regan wakes up in the middle of the night, and she slowly goes down the stairs, and she reaches the room inside which her father and his lords and noblemen, they are all partying, right? They are drinking, and they are having all sorts of noisy, violent celebrations inside the room. So it is almost like a bacchanalia. A bacchanalia is a celebration of Bacchus, who is the goddess of wine. I mean, the god of wine in Roman mythology. So Regan slowly opens the door, and the things that she sees inside scares her, because although King Lear is drinking and laughing and shouting with his peers, he is also physically and sexually abusing Regan's mother, the queen, who is also present in that room. So that is a very traumatic scene for Regan, and she is scared and she goes back upstairs. So this is the interaction between Regan and her father, right? One of fear, one of trauma that she experiences. Now, coming to the third interaction, that between Goneril. In Goneril's case, when she goes down to the room, down the stairs and into that room, the room is empty. Lear is not there. But instead of Lear, you have the throne in which Lear sits. So what does Goneril do? Goneril gets on the throne and she sits there. And when King Lear enters the room, he sees Goneril sitting on this throne, and he understands. He understands that this is a daughter who wants to take my place. Okay, she is going to usurp me, or she is going to take away my power, or she is hungry for my power. And Goneril also understands that Lear knows this. This is the intention, and she smiles at her father, a knowing kind of smile. I know that you are afraid of me. That sort of a smile. So, three daughters, three extremely different interactions, and from these we kind of understand that there is no uniformity in the sort of relationship between King Lear and his daughters, right? He is not always a loving father. He is not always a violent drunkard, and he is not always an exacting father. He is all of these, and he is none of these. So that is sort of the idea that we get from this scene. And then in the final part of this scene, you have again the fool, and she gives us a sort of a tour of this castle. She tells us about the kitchen. She tells us about the living quarters. She tells us about the throne room. In all of these rooms, she repeatedly mentions the presence of knives. Okay, so earlier also in the first scene, we saw that Regan likes to carve using her knife. And here again, the word knife is repeatedly mentioned, and this is again an instance of foreshadowing, because later on in the play, the presence of a knife will become an important factor. So this picture shows another of Shakespeare's plays. You have Macbeth here, who has just come back from King Duncan's room after murdering him, and you see Lady Macbeth, who is scolding Macbeth, asking him, why did you take those knives away from the murder scene? You should go back and put them near the dead bodies. Okay, so the presence of knives or daggers reminds us of other Shakespearean plays. Now we come to scene 4, and this scene is titled The Fool and the Sisters. Okay, so this is a comparatively short scene in which we see the sisters trying to interact with the fool, and the sisters continuously question the fool about her life or his life, and the fool avoids answering all the questions, and she says that she can be anybody or anything that they want to be, because she's merely a paid person, right? She's a servant. She's a member of the working class, and she has no luxuries like these princesses have. So this is a scene which contrasts the lives of the princesses with that of the fool. And throughout the scene we see references to abandonment, about how the fool spent time without anybody's care, how her or his parents were unread people, they did not anticipate his birth. And uh, and we also get the idea that the fool spent a lot of time as an entertainer, as a person trying to eke out a life by entertaining others, uh, at the same time not addressing his or her own problems. So, like a clown at a circus who is forced to make others laugh despite what he feels, we see the fool also spend a lot of time, doing all kinds of weird circus tricks, parlor tricks in order to have money. This is also a scene which tells us about the reality of life as somebody who is from the lowest classes of society, about the oppression that they face, about the discrimination that they face. And through this scene, the playwrights are reminding us that um, sometimes the lives of princesses and kings and queens can make us blind to the lives of ordinary citizens, ordinary people like the fool. And we need to pay attention. We need to devote our time to their narratives, their stories as well. So that is sort of what the scene is doing. And at the end of the scene, the princesses, they ask the fool, if you were not a fool, then what would you be? And the fool answers, if I were not a fool, I would be a dog without a master. So that means that the life of the fool, whether he has a master or not, whether he is serving the king or not, is equivalent to that of a dog's life. Right? It is not a life of luxury. It is not a life of privilege. It is merely the life of an abandoned or a masterless dog. So that is a very very powerful comparison that the fool ends the scene with. Now coming to the last scene of this this class, in scene 5 we see another occasion where King Lear is coming back to the castle after spending a long time away. In fact, throughout the play, we often don't see King Lear spend any time with his family. He's always doing something else. So this time, after a tournament, after a sporting event, King Lear is coming back to his castle. And from the description, we understand that although King Lear is 65 years old, he is supposed to be the best sportsman in that country. And it is said that the title of king does injustice to King Lear. That is, the title of king is not enough to capture the power and glory that King Lear has. He is much more than a king. He is like a demigod. And he engages in all these kinds of heroic activities. He goes out there hunting and killing and participating in all kinds of extremely physical activities, and there is nobody in the country who can beat him at that, even at his age. And this is either this is an exaggeration, this is not true, or it may be that the citizens of King Lear's country are too afraid to, actually compete with their king. If you enter into a competition with the king and if you win, that means that the king loses, and that might not be something that the king might enjoy, right? Losing is not something that a king would enjoy, and in the process of winning, you might actually lose your life or your head or something, right? So um, uh, maybe the citizens of King Lear's country are too afraid to defeat him, or too afraid to compete with him directly. So anyway, we see King Lear participating in all kinds of sporting events. We don't know what kind of sporting events these are, whether it is a hunt, whether it is hunting, or maybe it is a tournament in which knights participate, like jousting. But anyway, we see him now coming back to the country triumphantly. That is, he has won. And the news of this arrival is, received by the three daughters, and each of them reacts in their own particular way. And that is the main part of the scene, the reactions of the three daughters to the news that their father is arriving. And in Gondrel's case, we find that Gondrel initially is very, optimistic about her father's arrival. She is looking forward to this reunion with her father, and initially her impressions of that incident, that reunion, are all in positive terms. Cordelia is also looking at this in a very anticipatory manner. She is, she's anticipating the return of her father, and you know, she is dressing up and putting on makeup, preparing herself to look the best when her father comes back and takes her into his arms. But Regan is the only person who has a very pessimistic attitude towards this. For her, the very day on which King Lear returns is a sad and rainy day, and she has no optimism or enthusiasm towards the news that her father is returning. So all three children, they get dressed. They are all slightly happy that they get to go out of the castle. They get into the wagon and they reach the city square where King Lear will arrive. But before he arrives, the crowd which has gathered there, they start reacting badly towards the presence of these princesses. At first, Gondrel thinks that this crowd is cheering for their father, but then, it turns out that the crowd is actually becoming more and more violent. Right, the crowd is, not actually cheering for the presence of these royal children, but rather they are reacting with hostility. Okay, but all this changes when King Lear finally arrives, and he is described in extremely, powerful terms. It is as if, he's like Hercules, right? This is a picture of Hercules, who is supposed to be a demigod, and King Lear is also described in such terms about being extremely masculine, extremely powerful, and almost divine in nature. And his appearance, quietens down the crowd, and he goes up to his daughters, and we see this reunion where the daughters are all, rushing towards their father, and trying to hug him, trying to get close to him. Gondrel is the first to go up to her father, but King Lear pushes her aside and he only picks up Cordelia. He picks up Cordelia and kisses her on the cheek. So till this moment, Gondoril was extremely enthusiastic about her father's return. She wanted to be there first, but when she sees that Cordelia is the one who is being favored, she loses all her hope, and she feels dejected. Now, as far as Regan is concerned, uh, while the crowd was reacting with hostility towards the king, towards the king, somebody from the crowd threw a rotten vegetable or a rotten egg towards the wagon, and this strikes Regan on the face. And that again, like the experience of walking down into the king's room in the last scene, this is also an experience of trauma for Regan. Later on also in the play, we find Regan experiencing more physical trauma. We'll come to that. But this is how the day turns out for Regan. So after the crowd becomes violent again, the whole team of King Lear and his daughters, they go back to the country to remain safe from the crowd. So from this we understand that the people of King Lear's country are not entirely happy with him. So for them, this is probably not the best government that they are experiencing. Later on also we find clues that the people are fed up of King Lear's reign, and they actually want to depose him. And it's almost like a revolution is in the background, almost like at any time a revolution can take place. So this is a summary of the ideas that are discussed in scenes 3, 4 and 5. So just go back and read the scenes once again, and I will see you in the next class with the rest of the play.